This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hello, everyone.
How's everyone feeling? Good?
It's time for your lighthearted political podcast that everyone enjoys and is good.
Do you remember, Tom, when we started the podcast and we were like, we want to make this a space to, create hope and joy in the bleak political landscape? I spent a good, amount of time before this episode thinking, is there like some good news story I can bring? And I came up blank.
Nothing. News-wise, this has been one of the worst weeks of my life, to be brutally honest. It's bad across the board. And that's even coming from our very pronounced positions of privilege, but we still feel fucking bummed. No doubt people can guess what we're going to be talking about for the bulk of the episode. We are not going to be wading into in any serious depth the situation in Israel-Palestine, even though that has obviously dominated the news over the past week and is a truly horrific, god-awful, absolute shit show of a situation. Mm-hmm. It has been so heartbreaking to see what's been happening in that part of the world, and Jesus, what can one say?
And the ramifications here, like just spreading, across the world as well, like just the heartbreak and the anger and
it's been horrific, and our solidarity and love goes to all victims of violence, including, absolutely within the Jewish community, that, spiked increases of anti-Semitism, the innocent victims in Israel that were targets of those war crimes committed by Hamas, and the response we've seen from the Israeli state, including, as we record this, a threatened ground invasion of Gaza, the committing of further war crimes. Solidarity to all the people trying to explain the situation and provide a level of context to that situation, and being hounded down and demonized across the media on a regular basis. Solidarity and love to people trying to implement their democratic and political rights and protest in solidarity with an oppressed people, the Palestinian people, and once again having the force of the state and the media come down on them. I'm very glad that the protest is going ahead today in Sydney in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Solidarity to our New South Wales Greens comrades who played a big role in organising these rallies. Jesus Christ.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine. I think just briefly.
To be clear,
and again,
free Palestine.
Yeah. We will return to this story in coming weeks, I'm sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Adam Bandt, leader of the Greens, did tweet at the start of the week, the Greens condemn the horrific attacks on civilians. We condemn the occupation. It's time for a just and lasting peace. To achieve peace, the occupation of Palestine must end. He later tweeted, this is all deeply painful time for Palestinian and Jewish communities, many of whom who are watching these atrocities with fears for the lives of their loved ones. We must meet this moment with humanity. We cannot allow the movement for justice and peace to be compromised by hate. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are completely inexcusable. I condemn any move to weaponize this moment of immense suffering to advance an agenda of bigotry. For there to be a lasting peace, there must be an end to the State of Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories. End the occupation. I think that's pretty well said. Well, Max Chandler-Mather also had a thread which sort of also recounted some of the history in regards to...
I thought his statement was quite good. I found that helpful to kind of orient myself in a way.
Sure. We might include that in the show notes too. But yes, love and solidarity to everyone ever, all the time, always.
Solidarity forever.
Funny stuff. Funny start to the show. Let's tell the good people what they're listening to, Emerald.
It's Serious Danger, podcast about green politics in Australia, not an official Greens Party podcast, made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin. And this week, we're going to talk about the referendum, the voice or lack thereof in the Constitution. Maybe just before we get started, it is a fucking rough time, and particularly for Mob, if you feel like you need someone to talk to, recommend getting in touch with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Crisis Support Line 13 Yarn. So it's 139276. And feel free to just maybe, feel free to skip the episode or pause, take a break. Like, honestly, I think we went back and forth a little bit about whether to do an episode following the kind of calls for a week of silence, which maybe, we'll touch on a bit more. But I guess we promised an episode, and maybe it's helpful for some people to just kind of sit and talk through. For some people that might not be helpful. Yes.
I mean, this feels inappropriate, but a bit of housekeeping. We do want to say thank you to the patrons who've got on board in the past week. We've got at Serious Danger, patreon.com/Serious Danger AU. Briefly, thank you to Ollie, Maria, Daniel, Anthony, Spell, Melissa, Carol. We did release a Patreon episode this week talking about the ethics of going on holidays, which was a great conversation.
I feel embarrassed.
Weird plug. There's been a lot going on. Anyway, you can always support the show if you so wish. If you don't want to, that's fine. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we're calling South Australia has voted no. And of course, with 3 states voting no, the referendum is defeated as well, whatever happens in Queensland and Western Australia.
So there it is. Anthony Green has called it at 7:24 p.m. The Indigenous voice referendum has been defeated.
Australia has voted no to enshrining an Indigenous voice in the Constitution after this long-running campaign that really began with the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
This was the request from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people 6 years ago at the Uluru Dialogues when they issued the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Okay.
Goddamn. So what were you doing last night? How did it all go down for you? This is the fucking bizarro version of our post-election episode, by the way.
Yeah, that's so true. I was not driving home laughing.
No.
Not at all. I was just at home. I, was cooking dinner and keeping an eye on the news as the results rolled in, and they rolled in extremely quickly. I saw the alert. And to be honest, I kind of tried to just look away for the night and caught myself up this morning. Were you at a Yes event?
No, I was at my boyfriend's Melbourne Fringe show was on, and I thought, maybe at Trades Hall in the city, because the Victorian Unions movement was campaigning very hard for yes, maybe they'd be having an event at Trades, even though Fringe is on, maybe they'd put something aside. And I received the message that no, elders and indeed the entire movement were like, we're really worried about this, and we think that could be the most depressing event of all time. So there was no sort of, watch party specifically. I did see my boyfriend. My boyfriend is a Waka Waka guy. He was there. There were other First Nations castmates. His mum was there as well. And so the show was at 6. We watched the show and then we went out to pub for dinner. And yes, even by the time we pretty much got to dinner, the ABC called it. I saw, just had one of these moments, and I feel like, we'll talk about the correct leftist response to these things and picking through our emotions and what does this mean and yada, yada, yada. But like just a few moments of like absolute rage. I saw an older woman, her son was on his phone. He looked up, he said, they've called it, it's a no. And she broke out into a smile and gave a double thumbs up. And I cannot understand what's going on in that person's mind.
What have you just gained? What does that mean for you personally?
Why are you so happy? And why can't you give a skerrick of consideration for what this means for other people, particularly when those people include the most marginalized community in our society? I don't know. I had a very uncharitable series of thoughts seeing that. It was a real fucking bummer.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of these people would say that they think that somehow the no was a poor result for Aboriginal people and they care about Aboriginal people. I mean, it was interesting.
She was not a progressive no voter. I've got to take it wild.
But even the conservative no takes that line.
Of course, everyone has to say that. Basically,
no, it's because I care about Aboriginal people, our Indigenous people, as these people like to say, our Indigenous Australians.
I don't even see Indigenous people. I think we're all Australians.
I don't see colour. WA people in WA were still lining up to vote as it was announced, that's quite bleak, isn't it?
Yeah, fuck.
It makes you feel. I'm sure you would feel a little bit insignificant, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But I don't know. What's the count sitting at the moment?
The latest, as at the time of recording, I think it's 75% counted, and we have basically a 60-40 split. Now, again, ABC and what's his face, the poll guy on Insiders was saying these numbers will change a fair bit, but that's probably vaguely in the ballpark. It's sort of too early to determine which polls were the most accurate. But overwhelmingly, it is a thumping victory for no. It is an unequivocal 60-40 in no's favour. And the extraordinary thing really is that all 6 states voted no. The only place to vote yes is the Australian Capital Territory. In the Northern Territory, again, in this breakdown on Insiders I caught just before we started, urban centres of Northern Territory voting no, overwhelmingly remote communities and indigenous communities voting yes.
Which is an interesting reversal of other states, right, where the inner city has voted more yes and the regions have voted no. I'm curious, do we have figures on turnout?
I haven't seen anything to that effect yet, no.
I'm really interested to see turnout and how low it is. I'm even curious, I would be not that it really will make enough of a difference, but I'm curious to know whether the pre-poll votes, if they're still being counted, if they would swing more yes, if people who were keen for change would get in early and vote. But I don't know. But yes, it's clearly a no.
I wouldn't be surprised if the turnout is higher than normal based on pre-poll. Okay, so you had about 6 million people voting pre-poll. And on the day before, on Friday, the day before the actual referendum day, I think they had about 1 million people cast their vote on that one day. And that is the highest day of pre-poll voting in Australian history.
It's interesting. Yeah, but were the days before that consistently high?
I think it's a huge amount of people who came through pre-poll, yeah.
I wonder why. Yeah, I find it surprising if the turnout was as high as a regular election. So yesterday I went and saw my brother, who lives out near Logan, and we just went to visit him and my nephew, and he had no idea that the referendum was on. He was like, oh yeah, I knew it was coming up. I drove him to go vote, convinced him to vote yes, by the way. He was considering no.
Hang, are you telling me your brother doesn't listen to this fucking podcast?
No.
I mean, neither does my brother, but I don't know why should you also need
No,
to.
my brother does not listen to this podcast. I'm quite certain of that. It was an interesting conversation with him, though, where he was, had been considering no. Ultimately told me that he went in to vote yes, but clearly wasn't enough.
Why was he flirting with no? What was his reasons?
There are a few. I would characterize him as extremely anti-poll. And extremely critical of government and establishment. It was the sort of it was simultaneously, well, I don't think this is the answer, it won't do enough, but also slippery slope kind of arguments about what this could pave the way for. Interestingly, so it sounded like really his concern was around native title stuff, and as I'm sure we'll talk about, that was really a lot of the no campaign pulled in stuff about native title and reparations and land and everything, as though that was part of this vote, which it wasn't. But the critiques of native title, I think, are interesting. He was talking about, Aboriginal corporations that maybe exclude some traditional owners and make claims that may not be necessarily always on a basis of representing all of the cultural interests of traditional owners in the area. Talking about he was talking about mining claims being shut down, and that affecting the community and the town. But it was just this kind of mishmash of, I have a bad feeling about it. I think he even said, I just don't feel good about it. And so, but yeah, he actually said, he's like, I just kind of have a bad feeling about it, and purely on that basis was
vibes,
entertaining a no. He was like, I've got a bad vibe about it. And since, as a white guy, I mean, his son is Aboriginal, interestingly.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably for him, what's in a yes vote. But I said to him, well, maybe yes there isn't any significant benefit for you, but what's the benefit in a no? There's damage in a no vote. There's no harm in a yes vote. So anyway.
Well, thanks for doing the Lord's work. I called an elderly relative who I should have called earlier.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually ask her how she voted. I was like, have you voted yet? She said, yep, all done with pre-poll. I was like, with the postal service. I was like, okay. Anyway,
how are you?
Maybe we should have done more. Yes.
I would love to catch up.
Oh, God. Should we burrow down a little bit more into this? I mean, yes, by electorate. So again,
Yeah.
wall to wall, six out of 6 states voting no. Maybe it's my Victorian bias. I'm really surprised the Victoria voted no, but again,
Yeah,
that
well-
urban rural split might help to explain that.
At least your state didn't vote fucking like 70% no.
Yeah. What happened to Greensland there?
Well,
Really
yeah.
not coming
All the
through.
Green seats did. So the only electorates that voted yes in Queensland were Griffith, Brisbane, and Ryan. What a
Yep.
fucking surprise! I think, I mean, without spending too much time on party politicizing it, all of the Greens electorates did vote yes, and I know there was a bit of like in the week leading up to this. Labor in Queensland in particular, I don't know if they were doing this elsewhere, were kind of publicly like Leanne Enoch in Queensland Parliament stood up and had a go at Max Chandler Mather for running training workshops while while he should have been campaigning for yes. Wrote a letter to him. She spoke about that and said the Greens weren't doing enough to support the voice. Max said that at the time that she sent him that letter, he was on a pre-poll booth handing out for yes.
Jesus.
Greens officers organised booth captains or, organisers for the yes campaign. A lot of Greens staff were doing that even in a volunteer capacity, organising for yes. And so, I think it kind of, I think, became less potent in the final couple of months of the campaign. But that thing of for a while that it seemed like Labor were going to try and use this as a wedge to say that, to try and take back some votes from the Greens by saying the Greens didn't support the voice or, if the voice doesn't succeed, it's the Greens' fault. I mean, I don't think that that's true.
That's very silly, yes. The highest yes vote was in Adams' seat and then Albo's, Tanya Plibersek.
78% in Melbourne. That's that's resounding.
So there you go. You've got here high yes vote among higher education and incomes. Do we have
That's
some
the
exit
take
polling
so
and stuff?
far. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Well, that's, I guess, experts. What do you call them? Demographic expert. What's the word what are those people?
Psephologists?
No, not psephologists, not elections, but like people who study the kind of the population. Anyway.
Demographers.
That's what I was looking for. Say that the higher yes
It's
votes.
still pretty cool that I knew the word psephologist, though. Can we just acknowledge that?
And what letter does that start with?
P.
Yes. Well done. You
See,
win.
I'm higher educated. That's why I voted yes.
And that's why you voted yes. Yeah, apparently. Well, there was a bit of, so like the commentary is like, yes, higher educated areas tend to have a higher yes vote. And also, I mean, higher income, which obviously often comes with higher educated, but kind of the idea that people who were struggling more with cost of living pressures might have been less likely to support something that didn't offer immediate hip pocket relief. I guess, we don't really know. It's one of those things. Everyone will fucking speculate about why people did what they did. I did think it was interesting that, the highest no vote was Maranoa in Queensland. That's like a it's like a rural seat. Very
That's
conservative.
David Littleproud's seat, the leader of the Nationals. And fuck me dead, I heard a grab of this cunt at pre-poll, like at the polling booth on the day of the referendum, giving a quote to the media, talking about how we've got to listen to elders. That's how you get better outcomes. Like literally doing a pitch on the day that he is out there being a leading no voice, giving a quote to the media saying, what we need to do is listen and empower Indigenous communities. That is how we address Indigenous advantage. What a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, 84% no so far in Maranoa. I thought it was interesting that Maranoa was apparently also the electorate with the highest no vote to same-sex marriage plebiscite.
Right.
Only 56% no, because obviously broadly that plebiscite succeeded and there was a higher yes vote across the country. But I mean, it does, it kind of makes you, I don't know, the way that these things track across electorates and over time, it's like, it's just interesting that that's so consistent.
Well, yeah, sure, it makes sense. It's a conservative seat.
I know, but that's kind of what I mean. It's like we can bend over backwards, being like, oh, it's the cost of living crisis, it's interest rates, it's this particular political zeitgeist that's created this, or is it just like actually a bit simpler than that? It's like that area is quite conservative. Like, why are we doing a podcast? It's pretty simple.
Well, okay, I'm going to take issue with that. I don't think that's true. Maybe that's a good way to lead into the next section, which is, okay, why did this happen? Why did we get here? And obviously there'll be lots of analysis, and as I have more data, we'll get a clearer picture of what's going on. But I think it's important to say a few things. And this is not cope, although it probably is as well. But
this is not cope. Famously,
not
things that aren't cope always start with the people saying, this is not cope.
I'm not racist, and this is not cope. I mentioned briefly that I did this show about the history of referenda and sort of looked into it. So once again, the 8 times that we've had a successful referendum in this country out of the now 45 attempts that we've had, all those 8 attempts had bipartisan support. They were overwhelmingly proposed by conservative governments. Labor's only successfully changed the constitution once. They tried to do it 26 times now, and they've only done it once.
Labor success?
The only one was in 1946 on the social services referendum when Ben Chifley got the Commonwealth power to do welfare stuff.
Yeah.
Very rarely did they had the backing of the Liberal Party after they got this fucking amendment to the proposal, which basically means that we can't have a national health service in this country. Menzies specifically got that in, and also took out dental services. So that's the heart of all our problems in regards to Medicare and dental services.
Yeah.
And also of those eight changes, they were not radical in any serious way. They weren't a massive change. I'm not saying the Voice was a radical proposal, but in terms of the status quo, it is a substantial change to how our government operates.
Is it?
At least could be painted as such. Perhaps that's a better way of putting it. 4 of the successful proposals were basically reaffirming the status quo. Mm-hmm. And basically, if there has ever been a serious no campaign put up against a proposal, that referendum has failed.
Right.
So really, and now leading into this referendum, the Yes campaign and proponents of the Voice were saying so much has changed. History is not a good indicator of repeated success. And, we can make our own history. We can do that. Even once we lost bipartisan support at the start of the year from the conservative forces in this government, in this country. And I guess now, with the benefit of incredible hindsight, perhaps, that was just way too much to hope for. That was just completely unrealistic based on the overwhelming historical record. In fact, some people like Gary Foley, who was certainly a huge critic of the Voice and basically called for a progressive no vote, he was sort of saying things have gotten worse. Things have gotten far worse on the race question than things were in, say, 1967. He would argue that we've had, 40, 50 years of culture war and history war, and the division that can be and misinformation that can be spread through social media that actually makes things worse. And of course, the social fabric has been torn apart by neoliberalism, and the resentment that some people feel towards racial minorities, including First Nations people, has only gotten worse as their living standards have either have plateaued or declined. So I don't know if that makes anyone feel any better, but I guess it's just important, I think, to put it in that historical context. The extraordinary thing would be for the Yes campaign to have won. That would be remarkable in a very incredible way, really.
Yeah. What do you think about? I mean, I saw Professor Anne Toomey was saying that basically there will be no more referenda after this. No government will try again because they will see that it's just not worth it. It's too hard. And in particular that this is there's no chance for a republic now. I think this was in the ABC. She was saying the people who don't want a republic have been very deliberately opposing the Voice referendum because they see that if they can knock off that will damage the possibility of a republic in the future. Killing off the Voice is a way of killing off the republic. I thought that was an interesting take.
Certainly. I mean, it doesn't help the case of changing the Constitution, or if any other change does get up, it will be almost meaningless to me. I mean, the changes that will be made will be so uncontroversial and insignificant, they won't. I don't know. It'd be hard for anyone to get particularly excited about them either way, really. The only kind of proposals that we put out there. Now, I do think there is a change. There is something else in the question when we come to a proposed constitutional change that would actually affect all Australians, as opposed to what we had this time around, which was this extremely unfortunate and focused proposal that was being advocated for. I mean, many people said this will be better for everyone, but okay. But like the majority of the conversation was around why this is important for First Nations people, why the First Nations community need this and deserve this. And that's where, the huge amount of the conversation took place. And as lots of people pointed out, you had 97% of the country who were non-Indigenous weighing in, debating, considering this proposal, which was for the benefit of a very small group of people in the First Nations people.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very clear anti-politics analysis of what has happened with this referendum. And it's an interesting, I was thinking about the way that people vote in a general election and voting on, they vote on, in theory, a group of policies and the people who are bringing forth those policies. And I think perhaps a lot of the reason that we see people becoming less tied to their party choice or becoming less interested in general in voting for politicians is because, they don't believe that those policies have any connection to them in particular and the struggles that they're facing. And similarly, I think, yes, the vast majority of white Australia would see that that an Indigenous voice to Parliament is nothing to do with them, and so they have no interest in voting for it. I mean, I was thinking that if Australians had a choice, like if Australians had a no option on the ballot paper at a general election, they'd probably choose it. You know what I mean? If they had, and maybe for people who are Greens members who listen to this podcast would know, in our elections, we have an option in internal elections, a seek further candidate option on the ballot paper, or colloquially referred to as seek. If that's effectively a no vote to all of the candidates who are on the ballot paper. If we had that, at our elections, I think Seek would be voted would get a high vote.
Would be Prime Minister.
Yes.
Prime Minister Seek.
Because people are like, none of these people and none of these policies have anything to do with me. Or even if they do, they won't materially improve my life. And I don't want any of it. And yes, we've increasingly seen that in, I think, the patterns, the shifts away from the major parties and the kind of protest and anti-political vote, and in the way that Australia has voted no to the Indigenous voice in the referendum.
Now, yes, that's a very good point, and I think speaks to the other reaction which I'm seeing from lots of people. And look, people are just angry and fucking defeated and depressed. And as I say, this week has been absolute dog shit. And for a lot of people, especially First Nations people fronting the Yes campaign, right?
Yeah.
Like working their fucking guts out, fighting it, not to speak of the elders and the decades and decades of political fight and struggle that have brought us to this point. Obviously, for those people, this is an absolute a horrific blow. Lots of non-Indigenous allies who are also, really strongly invested in Yes for lots of various reasons, because they really believed in it, because they have First Nations people in their lives, because they want the country to be better, also feeling defeated. But you are seeing across left social media an outpouring of fuck this country is racist, this is backwards, I'm so ashamed, etc., etc.
And I think I do, just to be very clear, what I just said in terms of this being reflective of like a broader anti-political mood. That's not to say that it's not also racism.
Right.
Just to be clear.
And we will never be able to determine, even with exit polling and data, we'll never be able to say it was 40% racism in that vote. But what, I think it is important to say that, I certainly do not accept the notion that 60% of Australian voters are irredeemably racist.
Interesting.
And want worse things for First Nations people. If I believe that, I wouldn't be a socialist. I wouldn't bother with politics. I'd fucking give up.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, irredeemably racist, sure. Like, maybe not. I think racist in some way, probably. I mean, maybe, I don't know if we've had this conversation before, but it's like, I think, yes, in a racist system, a lot of people will have a bit of racism in them. That's, but yes, maybe not irredeemably and not consciously wanting things worse for Aboriginal people. I agree with that.
Yes, and again, it's also impossible to pick apart how much of this is misinformation. Did people go into the voting booth having some really set ideas about what this voice was and what was going on that were completely not true. I mean, obviously lots of people did have that. Like I know for a fact the level of misinformation being on pre-poll. I did some more pre-poll this past week, and the no guy was extremely eccentric, shall we say, and was handing out pens, right? They were handing out biros with the implication that the AEC was going to cross out their vote. We talked last week about the level of conspiracy thinking that invested in a lot of no voters. But 60% of Australians do not believe in those conspiracy theories, so something else is going on here.
Well, but it's true, like that imported kind of conspiracism about voting, which is obviously just taken directly from the States and from the Stop the Steal campaign, and the idea that Trump won the election. They've seen how well that's worked in America and been like, yeah, let's throw in a bit of that in Australia. I'm sure at every opportunity the conservative right will be trying to seed mistrust in the electoral system. Like Jacinta Price, right, has come out and kind of just alluded vaguely to the idea of voter interference in remote Indigenous communities, saying that there's a lot of manipulation from unions and from campaign volunteers who quote overpower vulnerable Aboriginal people. And it's like, what are you actually, like, you know, journalists tried to clarify this and was saying, is the AEC involved? And then there was this, interjection from Warren Mundine. But yeah, like because the no campaign also are still trying to push the idea that a lot of Aboriginal people don't want the voice. Right. But in reality, we already have seen in areas with over 50% Indigenous population that yes won. It's around 63%, the average yes vote in those areas. And so, yeah, they even have to try and undermine that by being like, oh, well, even where Indigenous people voted yes, it's actually there's something nefarious going on. Right. You can't even trust that.
Yeah. And so, again, a broader structural class analysis of the situation. So when we've got this cost of living crisis, when material conditions are worsening, when people feel precarious, at least I think we know that they are far more receptive to those kind of messages. Now, some people are saying, oh, they never should have held this referendum during a cost of living crisis. I find it hard to get on board that analysis. It's like when it was announced, the government was riding high and the concept of the voice was riding high, right? Like
that's right.
Like the political conditions for when Albanese got this shit going could not have been more favourable, you would have to say.
Yeah.
Obviously, things have gotten worse economically in that time in which the yes-no campaign played out. And obviously, the yes campaign and yes supporters completely underestimated the amount of purchase that both the official public-facing no campaign arguments would take and this insane undercurrent, pushed by groups like Advance Australia and Fair Australia, whatever the fuck they're called, how much purchase that would find, even with, lifelong Labor voters, Labor voters who are doing it extremely tough, who I guess were rejecting this particular part of the Labor platform in 2022 and weren't particularly invested in it when it comes to getting a voice up, and voted for Labor in the general election, but when it came to actually voting on this particular question, voted it down.
Yeah, and with the angle that the mainstream no campaign taking in the wake of this, being that Australia has that the no vote is a vote for concrete change, like it's a vote for actual material improvement, whereas the yes vote was for something symbolic but simultaneously dangerous and scary.
Yeah.
The analysis is that the LNP went so hard against the voice because they see it as a vehicle to delegitimize and to kind of bring down a peg the Labor government by, making the referendum loss a loss for Labor and a failure for the Labor government. I'm curious whether you think that is a valid calculation. Like, will it have been worth everything that they've poured into this? Like, is it going to make it harder for Labor to win the next election, which is obviously what the LNP wants?
Yeah, it's hard. I just want to acknowledge, if you're watching this on YouTube, something weird's happening with the light in this room and I'm looking whiter than ever, which is really ironic for this incredible conversation. God. Sorry, everyone. There was a ABC podcast that interviewed this referendum expert guy. Like, he follows referendum around the world and sort of the political fallout of how they work. And he was saying that overwhelmingly governments that put forward referenda that fail do not go on to lose. And in fact, oppositions that had put a lot of political capital in fighting certain referenda, even if they win, that's in no way an indication they're going to win the next election. I think from like internally within the Liberal Party, Dutton's probably, cemented his position because he was not having a lot of wins and they were dog shit and he was bad. I guess he's made a political calculation that at least to anybody who was, the moderates, I suppose, within the Liberal Party who are not Dutton fans, they have to shut up for a long time. They're going to be silenced because he invested a lot in this campaign and it fucking paid off for him. And how Labor responds to this and how they work it out will be the deciding factor, obviously, as to how what comes next, I suppose, and whether they can turn that into can neutralize that as any kind of political threat and carry on and be politically rewarded by moving on to other issues, I suppose, and telling other stories about issues facing people. They might be able to use that into some kind of advantage, but I wouldn't say it's like the death knell for the Albanese Labor government, certainly.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
What do I think about, whether it will make it hard for Labor to win? I don't really think that, people who voted for Labor but then saw that they couldn't, that under that government the referendum failed. I don't think that people see it as a failure of Labor or of Labor policy. No, I don't really think that it will lose Labor votes, but maybe it will. What is going to be interesting is whether, as I guess some people who are searching for some sort of hope on the yes side are saying that, well, the networks and the I guess the momentum that's been built in the lead up to the referendum, the people who've been organised can now be put to work fighting for justice on lots of other progressive causes and, for First Nations justice beyond the referendum.
Fighting Labor governments and their criminal justice policies?
Maybe. Who can say?
Again, a reminder, Labor in power across the country. And so, if we want to change things for First Nations justice right now, I'm sorry, they're the fucking enemy right now. No?
Well, it's true. I mean, obviously I agree with that. But it's like, is this an opportunity where we're like, we've just built these groups of people who we can now mobilize to fight for better? But I would be worried that people for whom, if this was their first experience of, volunteering on a booth or just volunteering for a political cause at all, and to experience such a crushing loss like this, that might, create more disenchantment than motivation. And hopefully that can be overcome. I think, yes, that like increased disillusionment, increased anti-politics and disengagement from politics is perhaps the greatest risk, particularly for a left movement like the Greens that relies on a movement of people and volunteers who believe that they can fight for something and win. I guess that's why, I think it's always been important for us to recognise throughout this process that, yes, we thought a yes vote would have been better than a no vote, but it's not the be all and end all. And, we keep working regardless of the result. And preparing for what's next has always been, I think, very important.
Yeah. And that works both ways, right? Like after the 2020 election, we were awesome, we were buzzed, we felt good, but it was like there was still obviously we didn't fix Australia in the following year. We're still working on that. There's always so much work to do. Can we also, I mean, again, not to further demoralize people, but an acknowledgement of what this says about the left's, the broadly progressive forces in Australia and our ability to organize and change things and change people's minds and speak to people. I mean, like across the board, the amount of endorsement that this voice proposal had, the amount of organizations, public figures, the amount of, for lack of a better term, elite backing that the voice proposal had.
Well, yeah, don't you think that was its downfall?
Whether the people hated that, but I guess yes, I suppose the cumulative effect. What would have normally been some version of, at least it had the appearance or the aesthetics of a social movement, right?
True.
That you would think that look, we've got the unions on board, we've got all these and not just celebrity, like annoying celebrities like me, you know, I'm not a celebrity or whatever, but like actually like untouchable Paul Kelly, John Farnham, Kathy Freeman, you know, sporting stars across the board, like massive, like Patty Mills, you know, like people who are universally beloved, really, across Australia, as much as any celebrity is like seriously respected for what they do, overwhelmingly backing in and being relatively vocal about being yes. All of that just didn't do it, right? Just
But
did not have the ability to speak to people. I don't know.
I do think that there's that. I think that the critique of the Yes campaign that it was a mistake to lead with that kind of elite endorsement strategy. I think that that's valid. I think perhaps it needs to feel like it comes from the conversations that you're having with people at social events and just in your everyday life and at work and at school and whatever first. And I feel like those endorsements, you know, could have come in at the end to really cement that this is where we're at as a society right now. Like isn't it, as I understand it, the Yes campaign, basically that the team that finished the campaign was very different to the team that started it. And I think we saw that in the different campaigning styles. I think that a lot of people left, a lot of organisers left, and there were new organisers brought on in the last month or so.
Right. Well, I definitely remember there was a point at which the Yes campaign was saying we're not doing celebrity endorsements, right? We want to centre and put front and centre the voices of First Nations people and ideally grassroots First Nations people and leaders of communities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that was the strategy at some point. And then at some point they pulled the big lever that said celebrities, please. Which is kind of understandable because, I mean, clearly a huge amount of this campaign was fought out online, right? And so finding people with massive reach and sending their message out there, the Briggs video that comes to mind, right, which hit 5 million views or something relatively quickly. I mean, those things definitely had an impact in some way, and I completely understand why people campaigning in 2023 want to, you know, need to fight that battle online as well.
That video wasn't because Briggs was like, hi, I'm Briggs and I support the Indigenous voice to Parliament. It was just an interesting video. I think a lot of people probably who shared that video didn't even know who Briggs was. Right. They were just like, wow, what a great video that, you know, depicts a conversation that I might be having with my friends at the pub. Like that actually to me is a sign that that is exactly the kind of campaign framing that was needed from the start. That it's like, you know, those conversations, that you're having with your networks. Here's a simple way to have those conversations. This answers the kind of questions that your friends might be asking you or that you might be asking your friends or asking yourself in a very simple and just, you know, based on a, you know, an even level. And I can't think of the term, but it's not talking down to anyone. It's not stratified. It's purely, person to person. And that, as we have said a million times, and as I firmly believe, that is the most effective way to persuade anyone is just, you know, is face-to-face talking to them human to human.
Yeah. You've written down here international embarrassment. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, even though, like I said, my brother was considering a no vote for various reasons, some valid, some I would say not so valid. But he was like, oh, I do think that, if we vote no, then the whole world's going to see us as a racist backwater and it will look terrible for us. And I don't know if the referendum has had much international coverage, and who knows, maybe it will have less given that there are other things happening in the world. But probably, some people will hear that Australians couldn't even do this most basic minimum thing that we're the only, you know, only colonised country that doesn't have Indigenous people recognised in our constitution, right? And we couldn't even do that. And people will probably be like, oh, yeah, Australia, the little place full of racists.
I think that's another point in the this isn't even a critique. This is simply an observation. But I suppose this idea of recognition of First Nations people as being the first peoples of this country in this proposal, as determined by the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Again, I'm not saying this is bad or anything, but I'm saying the Uluru Statement from the Heart explicitly said that the form of recognition we're seeking is this practical body to be set up, recognized, and then having this practical outcome of setting up the advisory body. Okay, now I completely understand why that's the case. I completely understand where First Nations people said, we don't just want a flowery preamble in the Constitution. We don't want you to just say, yes, you were here first. Who gives a shit? We want that to mean something.
Moving on.
Right, completely understandable. But I suppose it seems to me the way that has manifested itself in this debate is that people can, and Dutton was talking about this all the time, happy with recognition. Recognition is fine. That's great. But this voice thing, no. So we're saying no to the voice. We're not saying no to recognition. So the No campaign was actually able to pass those two things, I suppose, and sort of saying that you've bundled these up together, which is what, again, the Uluru Statement from the Heart called for. Completely understandable, completely justified. But I suppose they're able to present a reasonable case in that, hey, I'm into recognition. I want the best for First Nations people, but not like this, I suppose.
But don't you think that either way, the No campaign probably would have found a way to make even just recognition seem like something that was significant and unreasonable and something that people couldn't support? Like, because they didn't need to attack that. That's not what the attacks were focused on. They focused on, division and the Chamber of Parliament or whatever. I think that equally, if it had just even been about recognition, which I would hope honestly that we wouldn't even bother with a referendum just for recognition with no concrete outcome. Like, I think there's a very good reason probably that the Uluru Statement from the Heart didn't want that.
Well, they tried in 99, right? So the other proposal in 99 was this preamble, okay? So that was completely meaningless recognition. Recognition, again, this is briefly the show, but like the statement originally said, we recognise Aboriginal people and their custodianship of their lands, okay? And then Howard didn't like that because custodianship implied too much of a legal relationship between Aboriginal people in their own country. Yeah. So he changed it to kinship with their lands because he's a cunt.
Fucking cringe. Fucking stupid. Yeah, I just think like I think it's almost like referenda are so hard because we have all this fucking time to think about this one really quite narrow, specific issue. And it's like we're always just going to overthink it. Honestly, like you have that long to think about anything, and you, especially if you don't have a personal material interest in it, are going to think of a reason to be like, oh no, just too much of a risk. Like, why would I vote yes? I don't know. Doesn't feel totally 100% to me. I've had months to think of a couple of reasons maybe not to. So why would I vote for it? I think that it's interesting that, the Australian, in its coverage, particularly this morning, I don't know how long they've been using this framing, but I noticed that instead of reporting on yes versus no, they're reporting yes voters or the yes vote or yes campaign as those for change. And I think even just that rhetorical choice is really interesting. They're like, XYZ electorates vote for change, Greens electorates vote for change, those who voted for change, because they really want to exploit that inherent fear of change that we all as humans have that can only be overcome if there is a significant, benefit, probably personally or at least to someone close to us from it.
Yes, and let's be real. For white Australia, the status quo has worked out in very broad strokes. At least when it comes to the colonisation, dispossession of the first peoples of this country, has worked out very well. I hope that doesn't sound too fucked up or brutal, but I'm like, that's the truth, right? Like, changing the status quo.
But if we're saying that poorer people who are struggling more from the cost of living crisis, poorer white people, less educated white people have voted no, the status quo isn't necessarily working for them. But they were like, this doesn't help me.
Well, yes, I the status quo in relationship in regards to white people's relationship to this country as opposed to First Nations people of this country and what has happened in the history of colonisation.
They're like, well, hang on, I haven't even got, someone's about to cut in line in front of me is almost the thinking. They're like, I still, I haven't got my slice of the pie yet. And if there's anyone else here, then when people are fucking desperate, it's true. Like you get selfish and you get mean and you get, that certainly fosters that kind of a lack of solidarity with humanity when people really are struggling to survive. So maybe there is something to that cost of living analysis. But again, we don't know. It will be interesting. Maybe there will be some interesting exit polls. I don't know if there were many done at the booths, but yeah.
Just have people with microphones as they walk out say, "Are you a racist?"
Yeah.
And then we should just form a list, and so then we know where they all are. You know.
Hey, what are you listening to? How'd you vote?
Oh, all right. We can't carry on too much longer, but maybe just some.
So are we going to get the voice legislated anyway?
Great question. I have no fucking idea. I'll tell you who did briefly support that. Dutton. I understand. Yes, my understanding was at the press conference in which they announced that they would be voting no on this referendum. They do support a voice. They do support regional and local voices being legislated. My understanding is that commitment has since been abandoned by the coalition, and Albanese said pretty explicitly that if the voice is voted down, that his government will not pursue a legislated voice.
Oh, Albanese has said that he won't.
He said this on Insiders.
Right.
Now,
Lydia Thorpe said that she would support a legislated voice.
She then backtracked on that.
And then she backtracked. This is so
Backtracked on
fucking
that.
confusing.
Very confusing. And look, I have a skerrick of sympathy for Albanese in that interview. So this is the Sunday before the actual referendum day. So if you want a yes vote and you ask that question,
yes, I
why
agree.
say that you're going to legislate the voice?
It's hard to say. Yeah, you
from a strategy point of view. Like it's like I understand why you would not put that out there because that was so more. Now, whether he can backtrack on that now, I mean, almost certainly not, I suppose. And I guess you would argue that the resounding result from the no vote would, although you could also spin that to say, look, people didn't want it in the Constitution, but they still want Aboriginal people to be, they want to address Aboriginal outcome disadvantage. And so we should legislate this voice. I don't fucking know. I also don't know what the Greens' position would be on that necessarily, whether we support the legislation. I guess we probably would.
Probably. Yeah. I would almost certainly say yes. Yeah.
So there's that question. I mean, yes, as to what now? I mean, as you mentioned briefly, do you want to let people know about this week of silence that's been called for by First Nations leaders?
Yes. So there was a statement that I believe that it's kind of a joint statement from a bunch of different organisations, including the Central Land Council, I believe New South Wales and Central Australian Aboriginal Congress. New South Wales Land Council, Central Land Council, Central Australian Aboriginal Congress shared this statement calling for a week of silence, rather than, and this is where I'm like, rather than, picking apart and having your take on the referendum, like we just spent a fucking episode doing, still don't know if that was the right decision. Hey, send us your angry messages if you want. I don't know. But yeah. Basically,
this is white guilt. Do we stay silent? Do we stay silent in solidarity? Do we do the thing to talk about the thing to try and make things better? I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I don't know. We do a podcast every week, so that's what I've done.
That's what white people do. We podcast.
The world will be ending, and we'll be like, should we do we have to, I don't know. If we don't make the content, that's people might be mad.
The patrons. Think of the patrons.
Yeah, people pay for this. I don't know. Yes, but I guess like maybe there is something to that in that it's like we probably could just chill for a bit and not, bombard everyone with your takes unnecessarily and spend some time listening. And in terms of, call to action this week would probably be, yes, any way that you can support First Nations people, even just by being a bit more gentle with First Nations people in your life and offering resources. And there are, I guess we can put maybe some links in the show notes to donate, probably pay the rent. You donate to and Warriors of the Aboriginal Resistance. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, we'll put some links in the show notes there. I mean, people, Indigenous Literacy Foundation do fantastic work as well. I mean, yes, the pouring of love, solidarity, and resources into the fights for First Nations justice need to be there. I mean, the statement announcing from the First Nations leaders and campaigners for the voice, I saw it posted to Thomas Mayo's Instagram, and yeah, as you say, it's been put out there a fair bit. It is about taking a week of mourning, like actually taking the time to just to be sad, to be okay with that, and not have to pivot immediately to whatever's next. I think that's completely reasonable. And in that statement, I read a call to other First Nations peoples, particularly those, say, on the Black sovereignty movement, who advocated for a progressive no vote, a call to say, after this time of mourning, after this time of reflection, let's come back together. Let's talk about what is next.
Mhm.
Yes, and that morning, I think you mentioned is flying the Aboriginal flag at half mast.
Yes, half mast. Yeah.
It said something like "pack up the Uluru Statement from the heart" or something.
I saw that.
I don't know what it means by that specifically.
I'm not sure.
So the dream, the call, the desperate need for a treaty is still very much alive in the hearts of all these people, I'm sure, and the left and the First Nations justice movement more broadly. I think it's important.
I guess that's the thing. Yeah, a week of silence, not meaning to switch off, particularly. Maybe First Nations people might need a moment to switch off, but I think for a lot of people, for allies in particular, I would interpret that as not switching off, but sitting in it for a bit and then being ready to return and, be at the next rally to end Black deaths in custody and working for treaty and, justice, sovereignty.
Did you see the Noel Pearson quote from earlier in the week where he basically he kind of went he was sort of, for lack of a better term, black-pilled at that point. He clearly, this is about Tuesday or Wednesday. He had clearly basically given up or was basically accepting the idea of a no vote. The Prime Minister told Guardian Australia last month the referendum would have been worth it even if Australians reject the voice because it has brought Indigenous disadvantage front and centre in the national conversation. Asked if he agreed, Pearson said, "We'll see. What I do know is I'll never be an advocate for conciliation and compromise again, for trying to find a middle path. I'll follow the new leadership that will emerge. It will become time for a new leadership to chart a direction. What I'll never be able to argue for again is that a path based on recognition and reconciliation is viable. It won't be. We'll have gotten a very clear answer this weekend that those like me who've championed a middle path, our arguments have not been proven. They've been proven to be incorrect. Frankly, the voice is a proposal so pathetically understated that I'm amazed most Indigenous people are settling for it. After all, I helped design it as something so modest that no reasonable non-Indigenous Australian could reject it. More fool me."
Honestly, I think that's I think that's quite an honest and powerful, persuasive statement. But I think it's true. I think
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe not say that in the days before the vote, I guess.
Sure.
But
was there really a chance of turning the ship around?
Yeah.
We saw the Yes campaign really pivot because they surely, if you're a campaign, you have no choice other than to say, don't give up yet. There's still, there's still hope for a yes vote. We can do this. That's your purpose as a campaign. But I can absolutely understand why, when it became clear that it wasn't going to be a yes vote, that you just want to be honest about it. And probably people like Noel Pearson are really fucking tired and just want to drop, just want to say exactly how it actually feels. And from what I've seen, a lot of First Nations people are just feeling so deeply hurt and so just like, okay, so you would, Australia hates us that much, mistrusts us that much, has that much deep-seated kind of resentment and racism towards us. So fuck you. You couldn't even give us that. And that's a very valid feeling.
It's a completely, I don't want to instruct anyone about how to feel about this. I think that response to this, because embedded in that heartbreak and sadness is all the heartbreak and sadness of the way First Nations people have been treated in this country now and throughout our history. So I completely understand it. I suppose just as a movement, as people on the left, I just want to put a warning on a level of cynicism and nihilism around this stuff, right? I mean, this is the apology to the stolen generation, 2008, was extremely popular. There have been moments throughout our history in which I genuinely believe the vast majority of people in this country wanted good things, recognized the truth of our history, and are willing to do something about that. I do sincerely believe that. I know that this result is a massive blow to that theory and that idea, but I guess I'm not willing to give up on that notion as yet. And I think if you are seriously going to come to that position, you need to do some deep thinking and some consideration of the implications of that.
Because I don't necessarily take that statement that you just read as an annihilate or as a call to give up. I kind of take it as a call to be more radical, because, if we're going to fight, why not fight for something radical and for something big? And I think that's actually a good message, and one that is probably the most hopeful message that I can take away from this, and one that's most consistent with my values and how I try to live my political life.
Okay, generally, finally, I just think we should say something about the Greens and where we're at as a party on this. There was an email put out by Adam and Dorinda Cox. I'll just read the start of this, really. Today's a very hard day. We wanted to reach out and share in the emotion of this moment. First and foremost, we want to acknowledge the many First Nations elders and activists across the country who have stayed strong and resilient in the fight for generations. You have led a national conversation this year that will change this country's future for the better. For those who are feeling a sense of loss, like us, we say to you, the pathway to First Nations justice does not end today. There are many ways to advance First Nations justice. This was one way. There are many within reach. There is a formidable strength here. And now, as activists and allies, we cannot relent. We must use the momentum of this national conversation to recalibrate and recommit. And then it's sort of saying the referendum clearly demonstrated the need for truth-telling across this country, which is kind of an interesting position, right? I mean,
we spoke about that on the last episode, right?
Right. Yes. Again, I haven't looked into too much what the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa was like, but it does seem like it was a pretty incredible cultural moment. I shudder to think the bad version of that in Australia, and how much more of a horrific history and culture war it could unleash. But if it could be done in a powerful way, in a correct way, that could actually help to mend and heal. And it's, again, certainly what First Nations people called for in the Uluru Statement. So I think that's worth noting.
Well, yeah, and it would be a long process. I can't remember how long, but like in Aotearoa in New Zealand, I think their truth-telling process was, took years. And probably, as I understand it, people who are involved or who have reflected on that said that it probably could have or should have been longer. So that's interesting. I mean, quickly on that, just as a bit of sizzle, the other heartbreaking fucking loss that's happening right now, people are getting results on the New Zealand general election, and it seems like Labor has just really fucked it, really flopped. Their vote has halved. They had 50%, and they're now on mid-20s the way it's tracking. It'll take a bit longer to get the full results, the way that their voting system works. Looked like the Greens, classic Greens, sitting around 10%. I don't know how that plays out in terms of seats lost or won.
Well, it looks like they've won. They're up 4 seats.
Up 4 seats. Okay, isn't that interesting? And so that really that's an interesting reflection of kind of what we've seen in Australia. Yes, as a heads up for listeners, we're very keen to talk about that election and what the Greens did there and what it might mean for upcoming elections in this country. We're keen to get maybe someone from the New Zealand Greens to come on the show, but that'll be next week, I would say.
Just also finally on this email, the Greens have already secured money in the last federal budget for a Makarrata Commission, and we will be fighting to urgently advance truth and treaty. So that is also something to keep in mind, that that process has started, and obviously treaty processes are playing out at the state level across the country.
Yes.
I think the party will have to do some serious reflection and work, and we discussed at length about the First Nations Network position on The Voice last week. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we got some feedback from some people who really like our show, who thought that last week's episode did not handle that particularly well, didn't bring in a First Nations person to discuss it. We could have maybe spent a bit more time explaining the First Nations Network's position. I think that's probably a fair enough criticism.
Yeah.
And I think...
Tom, even you were like, we should read out the whole statement.
Well,
and I was like, I don't know, maybe people don't want that. And maybe
because
people
you
do.
hate
so that's
black
my
people.
bad.
I think that's what you said. I'm pretty
sure.
Yeah,
that's right. That's what I said at the time.
I don't want to verbal you. No, look, we're always trying to be better as a show. I think that's totally fair enough. And I definitely think that at some point, bringing in a First Nations member of the party to discuss on everything, reflect the whole thing would be a valuable experience. But we appreciate people who like the show, stick with the show, and still want to give us criticism and how they feel. We appreciate that, and we want to get better as a show, and we hope you know that comes from a sincere place.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll put links for First Nations organizations that we think are worth supporting and reaching out to in the show notes in regards to call to action. Again, solidarity and love to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, whether you voted yes or no, however you feeling. Even if you were a progressive no voter, I'm guessing today is not an amazing day.
Yeah.
We're sending you love and thoughts and God, what else? This week sucks. Let's start again. Can we start again, please?
Can we wake? Yeah, let's wake up.
Yeah.
Bad dream.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and listening. We love you.
Things will get better. They have to from here. We have to make them.
It's not hard to get better than this.
Yeah, that's right. Bye.
Boy.
Serious danger to Australia.